Welcome to Stephen FM AI, Island's Daily Digest. Today, we're diving into something that feels, well, pretty intense. It's like the entire nation is being squeezed from all sides at once. We're going to unpack how a single news cycle has revealed this perfect storm of crises, from actual storms to institutional failures, and try to understand what it all tells us about a country that might just be at its breaking point. So how exactly is this pressure building? Well, we're going to track it across 5 different fronts. We'll start with the most literal pressure of all, historic floods. Then we'll shift to the institutional strain coming from a really shocking inquest. After that, it's the social squeeze of a housing market that's just completely gridlocked. Then the economic pressure of a scandal hitting Brand Ireland. And finally, we'll look at the global pressures that have the government scrambling. All right, first up, nature's pressure. The country is still trying to catch its breath after Storm Chandra, which has left behind just a trail of absolute misery and a very stark warning about the future. And the scale of this, it's just massive. We're talking about near-record flooding all along the East Coast. The town of Enniscorthy was basically turned into an island, totally cut off when the River Slaney just couldn't hold it anymore. And at the peak of it all, you had 20,000 homes and businesses just plunged into darkness. This isn't just a headline. For thousands of people, this is complete devastation. But here's the real tension right now. The storm itself might have passed, but the danger? Not by a long shot. Met Aaron is warning everyone that the ground is completely saturated. That means there is literally nowhere for any new rain to go. So for the next 72 hours, the entire East Coast is on high alert. The threat of more flooding happening instantly is very, very real. So while towns are physically struggling to stay above water, the state's own internal safety nets are being submerged by a totally different kind of flood, a flood of scrutiny. We're shifting from a natural disaster to a crisis of institutional trust. Okay, this quote right here it's just stunning. At the inquest into the fatal shooting of George Ningcho, a senior inspector from the Armed Support Unit, that's the ASU, an elite team, he admitted that their training for dealing with mental health crises was, in his own words, quite minimal. That admission goes right to the very heart of how our police are equipped, or maybe not equipped, to handle vulnerable people. And just think about how fast this all went down. From the moment the Armed Support Unit got there to the moment fatal shots were fired, less than 1 minute. A minute. Yes, tasers and pepper spray were used, but that incredibly rapid escalation from arrival to lethal force is what's raising such profound questions about their protocols, or lack thereof. And this really gets us to the core conflict of the whole inquest. On one side, you have George and Nkencho's family who argue that the force used was completely disproportionate. On the other side, the Gardia are maintaining that the immediate threat was so severe, so urgent, that they simply had no other choice. That's the central, painful question this inquest has to somehow answer. Now, this feeling of systemic strain, it's not just in policing. For a huge number of people, it's being felt most deeply in the one place you're supposed to feel safe, your home. We're talking about a housing market in total gridlock, and it's leaving a whole generation feeling completely and utterly trapped. Just look at this data for a second. The number of existing homeowners who are actually able to sell their place and move somewhere else, the banks call them mover purchasers, has cratered. It's at its lowest point in a decade. A whole generation is effectively stuck. They can't move up the ladder, which jams up the entire market for everyone. And this is happening at the same time nearly 60,000 people moved into Ireland last year. Now, the government is trying to fix this, right? They're trying to radically shake up the rental market, bringing in 6-year leases to try and stop those no-fault evictions. But here's the catch. This is creating a whole other crisis. Small landlords, who make up a huge chunk of the rental supply, are now heading for the exits in droves. And that could make the supply problem even worse. So, while the government is juggling that domestic housing crisis, a brand new scandal is blowing up that threatens one of our most important international industries. This one is all about economic pressure and a pretty serious conflict of interest. So we're all on the same page. Let's just get a clear definition of what a conflict of interest actually is. It's when the goals of 2 different groups are just fundamentally incompatible. They can't both be true at the same time, and that is exactly what farmers and politicians are saying is happening at the very top of Board BIA, the Irish Food Board. So it all boils down to this one absolutely critical question. How on earth can the chairman of Board BIA, the state agency whose entire job is to promote premium Irish beef all over the world, also be the head of a company that was discovered to be importing cheaper Brazilian beef to sell right here in Ireland. The contradiction is it's mind-boggling, and it's a massive blow to the integrity of brand Ireland. And, protecting brand Ireland isn't just a domestic problem. That feeling of vulnerability is what's behind our final pressure point, a huge diplomatic push to try and secure Ireland's place on a very, very volatile world stage. To try and counter all these domestic problems, the government is launching this massive global charm offensive. For St. Patrick's Day, they're sending 38 ministers out across the world. And this isn't just about parades and green beer, it's about economic survival. That's why you see such a heavy, heavy focus on North America, a partner we absolutely cannot afford to lose. The centerpiece of this whole thing is the Taoiseach's visit to meet U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House. The government's position is that this direct access, face-to-face, is vital for protecting the Irish economy. But some opposition parties are screaming for a boycott, pointing to deep, deep concerns with the current U.S. administration. It's a visit with incredibly high stakes and a lot of tension back home. Okay, let's take a breath and pull all these threads together. It would be so easy to look at these as 5 different news stories, but they're not. This is the North Star for today's explainer. These are 5 fronts in the very same battle. A battle that's testing the resilience of the entire country. You can see the domino effect, right? The flood reveals our infrastructure is weak. The inquest reveals our institutional training has huge gaps. The housing crisis reveals a society that's totally gridlock. The beef scandal reveals a major conflict of integrity right at the heart of our economy. And all of these domestic failures, they just make our global position that much more vulnerable, which is why we need that massive diplomatic mission in the first place. So that leaves us with a big question, and I really want to know what you think. Of all these intense pressures building up on the nation, which one is the most urgent one to solve? Is it the housing gridlock that's just trapping an entire generation? Is it the crisis of trust in our key institutions? Or is it the economic threat to brand Ireland? Drop a comment below and let me know. And of course, make sure you subscribe for more deep dives like this. From saturated ground that literally cannot take one more drop of rain, to a saturated news cycle that's filled with one crisis after another, the pressure is on Ireland from every single direction. It's a true test of national resilience, and there are no easy answers in sight. And that's the latest from Stephen FMAI, Ireland's Daily Digest.